She's April.
And she's Molly.
And we are
the Book Besties.
New season, new round of spoilers, gang.
Welcome to our pod. It's a mess.
Not to derail us.
3 is a magic number.
I love you. Shut up.
I know how to read.
And people are walking into flapping walls.
I'm giving you this. This is for you. This is for you. Oh, you heathen, Molly.
That's okay because it's just a video game.
I'm a leaf on the wind.
Besties, it's a new flapping year.
New season.
And a new friend.
And a new friend.
Everyone say hi to Isaac Gordan. He is the podcast host, runner of Master of None.
Hey, everyone.
Say hi, Isaac.
Glad to be here.
Hi.
I'm not used to this video, but I love all of your hand motions.
That's a part of speech. It's,
Isaac's sitting here going,
so
what do I do with them?
What do I do with my hand?
What do I do with them? What do I do with them? So, I've known Isaac for, you and I got Sector around the same time, right?
2009 is when I got there. You got there.
7? Yeah.
I think you got there in 9 though, right, Molly?
No. Yeah, that sounds right. I got there. Well, I bounced between Sector Corpus and Houston there for a little bit. So,
okay.
But
I was there from 07 to 10.
Yeah, I met, what I knew him as is Mr. Gordan. I met Isaac when we were both in the military. He was an officer and I was enlisted. Now, I always forget, were you OCS or were you Academy?
I was Academy.
Okay. So
that was actually one of the questions I had for the next episode.
She's like, okay, we're
back to that.
We'll definitely circle back. But that's how he and I met. And over the years, we've become friends over the interwebs because of social media. And he kind of reached out to us and was like, hey, let's do a thing. And I said, let me get April. And here you guys are, and here we are. So let's.
And we've already established that April is like, sure, Molly, whatever you say.
Because I saw that you guys were launching the podcast, and you had posted about that. So that was kind of when I reached out. I was like, hey, that's awesome. At that point, I had been doing a podcast for, I don't know, year and a half or so.
A while.
Yeah, because I've been doing it for about 2.5 years now. So. Yeah, thought it'd be fun to do.
And it is wildly different than our podcast. Very different.
So different from our podcast. But I like your stuff. It's more of a Matt thing. If I could get Matt to listen to the pods.
I listened with Tom a few times and I was just like, okay, so I don't really want to build a fish tank, but
I could totally do that.
Like a year ago, I came home from work and our front yard was dug up and I was like, what the crap happened to our front yard? He's like, I decided to build a koi pond. I'm like, while I was at work? Like,
that is a super Tom thing to do.
Exactly the kind of thing that I do on Master of None, yeah. It's not all fish, though. There are, like, non-fish episodes.
What? Are you sure? Have you checked?
I'm sure, yeah. There are a few.
Okay.
But it's like a different, for your audience who's less familiar with what I do, so it's usually a weekly release, and each week there's a different hands-on project. Podcast takes its name from the saying, master of none. I'm sorry. Jack of all trades is a master of none. So the idea being like all of these different hands-on projects. So sometimes it's cooking or food stuff or farm and garden stuff or survival skills or carpentry or fish tanks, like you brought up, or what else? Hunting and fishing, all sorts of different hands-on skills.
I mean, you talked about building your house too on one of them, which I thought was really cool.
Yep. Yeah, so I built the house that I'm sitting in right now.
Like, and it's still upright, really cool. Which is a really W in my book.
These are all things that I don't do. I just want to stay in my house and read. And I don't want that house to be like, made by my husband. So people who know what they're doing.
You
Not
have
to say that you
YouTube,
don't know
right?
what you're doing.
Hey, when you're
Yeah, I
building a
actually
house, there's
saw,
so many little things though that it's like,
yeah.
okay, I have a, maybe some skills that I already have, like framing or finish carpentry or
Mhm.
laying wood floor or painting or electrical. Some of that was stuff that I already knew how to do. And then it's like, okay, tile. Like I kind of have a lot of general construction knowledge, but it's like I'm going to watch some YouTube videos to get some pointers on how to do tile for when I
Mhm.
tile the bathroom and the showers and the laundry room and stuff like that. So
That's how Matt learned it.
right,
Yeah,
I joke that I
watched
learned
a
it all off
YouTube video.
YouTube, but
Yeah.
in a way, it's
Well,
not
Well,
I
entirely
now
watched
you
true.
I watched a YouTube video that a woman did that. She built her entire house from watching YouTube videos, which I thought was really kind of cool. She was a single mom and she like just wanted to do the thing for
Mhm.
her kids, and she like built a whole house. And I'm like, good for you.
Go
Not
best
for me.
friend. Yes. Good
Go
for
best
you.
friend.
Good for you. Not
Not
for me.
me.
No, Matthew Biggs is the same way. He learned how to lay
Yeah.
our flooring and
Yeah.
like build
Yeah.
shit. Like he does it all the time. He does it all the
Molly,
time.
language.
Stuff. First bleep of
It's
the
okay. It's
episode.
okay.
So this
Besties,
week,
we're trying to be on our best behavior because Isaac's pod has a clean lyrics award on
It
Apple,
does,
which is
apparently.
freaking awesome.
which we're never getting.
No,
So-
the fact that he's been recognized by Apple is pretty cool because Apple doesn't acknowledge we're live. So
yeah, that's true. So should we like get to what we're talking about
Yeah.
today?
So, you mean we didn't invite Isaac on just to bullshit?
Molly, there's no helping her, Isaac. Just get prepared to bleep her. So we are doing 2 episodes. So this is the first of the 2. And next week will be the follow-up episode, which Isaac will also be on. And you can listen to both of these episodes on Book Besties Pod and on Master of None Pod. We are dual releasing. And so today we're actually going to be talking about Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. And I'm going to host. And then next week we will talk about Starship Troopers, said the right thing, by Robert A. Heinlein. Right. Is that how you say his last name? Okay. Yep. And Isaac is going to host this one. It. And we kind of picked these books because there's some crossover there, classic sci-fi and kind of a new take on sci-fi a wee bit. And so, that's the plan. And if you guys don't mind, I'll go ahead and do a synopsis.
Please.
We good with that?
And we also, there was a little bit of banter and a deal at the beginning that I told you guys that you could pick absolutely anything for me to read. I might have excluded Harry Potter, but other than that, I told you could pick absolutely anything.
Harry Potter.
And that I would agree to read it, and then I would pick the second one for you guys to read.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I exclude Harry Potter anyway, because I read it, and I'm done with it. We did our 2 episodes, and I don't have to read it again.
I promised her we wouldn't talk about it anymore, so we got to keep moving, or she's going to yell at me.
There actually ended up being some, even though we both picked the 2 books separately, there ended up being some interesting connections between the 2 of them that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll get into that
and
as we go through them.
Ready Player One was not new to me, but it was new to both of you, right? Neither of you had read it?
I've started it and ended it because Will Wheaton says this is his W sounds with a WH, which is really weird. So that's
do not hate on Will Wheaton. You know what?
I don't hate Will Wheaton.
You know what?
Okay, we're going to get into this when we get into the episode. Can you do the synopsis, please?
Fine. Gosh.
You love me. Shut up.
We haven't.
Can I make fun of you guys real quick?
I'm already fighting.
Yeah, sure.
And read you a little. So now that you're like a whole season into your podcast, and every single episode you give the synopsis of the book, you do know that the word's not synopsis, right?
It's synopsis.
Synopsis. Did you know that synopsis is a thing?
A synapse is the connectors in your brain, but you can actually say synapsis or synopsis because it has to do with the dialect.
I will believe you.
You can say synapsis if you are somebody that's from from the northeast side of the country, like Molly.
It doesn't make it
who
right.
Likes to who likes to mess with April about it?
A synopsis, if you actually look up synopsis on Merriam-Webster, It's the association of homologous chromosomes that's characteristic of the first meiotic prophase. So I'm going to stick with synopsis because when I looked that one up, it talks about like a summary of the storyline. But go ahead. I just had to poke a little fun.
That's fine. It's fine with me. I don't really care how we pronounce it.
I pronounce it both ways just to screw with people. So
yeah. All right. Come on, get it together. All right,
let's do this.
Wade Watts is a typical typical gunter in 2044. He is obsessed with 80s pop culture, classic video games, and finding James Holliday's Easter egg hidden in his most famous game, The Oasis. But 5 years into the hunt that started with Holliday's death, and not a single key has been located until Wade has a breakthrough in the game that is absolutely amazing for a level 10 warrior like him. While Wade who uses the Parzival as for his avatar. Oh my goodness. April. While Wade's main goal, and he uses the avatar Parzival, is to be the first to find Holliday's egg, winning complete control of late Holliday's company and fortune. He also wants to protect the Oasis from the evil empire IOI, from seizing control of the game and exploiting a loophole that would allow the organization to change the Oasis forever. There's lots of adventure, 80s references, and a love story for the digital age in this book. And I don't know why I couldn't get through that. Like, I know how to read. Like, I read all the time and out loud all the time.
I mean, you have a job.
People pay me to read out loud. You'd think I would have my crap together, but here we are. Here we are. All right, so there you go. There's your synopsis.
Whatever.
Doesn't matter. All right. All right, so let's get to the questions. All right, the book is flooded with 80s pop culture. We are all from the 80s. I was making the assumption that you were, Isaac, because you're probably our age.
Probably.
Yes.
Probably our age.
Maybe. There's a chance of it.
But we were all kids then. Did you understand all of the references, and was there one that really stood out to you?
Absolutely.
Every single one.
That's your answer to both questions.
It's a loaded question because if I didn't understand one of the references, I wouldn't even know it was there to like not understand. Anyway.
Valid point.
This is going to be a fun episode.
So one thing that kind of threw me off at the beginning. Oh, no, go ahead, Molly.
No, go ahead. No, you go first.
So
you're the guest. I'm not.
You had mentioned to me that the book was loaded with 80s references, so I'm like, sweet, right? It'll be fun, like good music, good, I don't know, whatever.
Movies, TVs, all that jazz.
Yeah. And then toward the beginning of the book, he really, some of the ways that he described stuff was like, and they were all wearing classic 80s clothing. And I'm like, wah, like lame way to like have a retro 80s feel to the book is just telling me that they're wearing 80s clothing. But I think as the book went on, the references references and 80s stuff became a little more subtle and just mentioning something that if you were alive in the 80s you would remember instead of having to tell you. And maybe that's his way of bringing in people who weren't alive excuse me, who weren't around in the 80s to let them know, okay, there's going to be a lot of 80s themed stuff in this book. So yeah, I think he pulled it off really well. But at the beginning I was kind of like, really, that's not a great way to do it. So
it was kind of like a simple push of getting you in the door, right?
Yeah, hey, exactly.
We're going to be talking about this, like none of this stuff is going to make sense if none of this is going to make sense if you don't know what 80s clothes look like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so for me, like I love the 80s. I love 80s music. I love 80s pop culture, but like I was born in 81. So I just turned 40. So all of our Book Bestie fans know that, but Master of None fans, welcome. I'm 40 now. So
and 40's for your comfort.
I was born in 82, so that's coming up next year for me.
Oh, yeah, I'm 83. We got all 3 years, Sandra.
Yeah, there we go. So because we were all born at the beginning of the decade, like what I know of the 80s is more things that I've learned as I've gotten older or things that my parents like music they listened to and
Yeah.
movies that they watched. And so there were a lot of parts of this book that like I didn't understand because my family was not into 80s nerd culture. So like Star Wars, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've seen every single Star Wars movie in the theater. I'm not old enough to have done that, but I went to like re-releases, so I've seen all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if Star Wars is mentioned, I'm golden. Lord of the Rings is mentioned, I'm golden. But when they start talking about some of the 80s movies and some of the 80s shows, and then like D&D, like I know what D&D is now because my husband plays it. Those things are my jam. But like I wasn't into that because that wasn't what my family was into. Right. So I think because I am not really I was born in that decade, but I didn't really immerse myself in that decade the way that like James Halliday would have because he was a teenager.
Right.
Right.
So
yeah, like some of the movies, like I've seen a lot of. I've seen a lot of the movies that come up in the book, but a lot of them I didn't see like in the 80s because I was like way too young for it to be appropriate. Right.
Right.
So I saw them later.
Right. Exactly.
There's where I come in. I was raised by teenagers in the 80s. So MTV was my constant television. Yeah. I saw Breakfast Club when it first came out. I remember seeing Fast Times at Ridgemont High on VHS. I remember going to Blockbuster. I remember doing all these things as young as 4.
Yeah.
Like that is like some of my first memories is like watching MTV and seeing Billy Idol on there and you know, those kind of things. So it's nostalgic for me. Right. I love 80s movies and music. I've always been a fan. So it was a nice nod to it. But I mean, they talk about Firefly all the time, and we know how much I love that show.
Oh my god!
But even as a kid,
let it go!
Like, the music aspect of it, like you know, you're riding in your car, listening to music on the radio, or you're just around hearing that music, as opposed to like a movie that's a more adult movie that came out then. Or like the 80s pizza arcade stuff in there. It's like I remember my first video game was actually Pac-Man at one of the. You remember how there used to be like the arcades at like the front of the grocery store sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah, and they have like the little horses that you can ride out front, and then you go into the arcade and they have the little arcade games. So like Pac-Man in one of those was actually my first video game that I ever played.
For me, it was playing at a laundromat.
Yes.
Playing arcade games at a laundromat.
Pizza Hut.
I was going to say those are washing machines, not arcade games.
The table game? Yes.
There was an arcade there.
It just spins around. I won.
I won every time.
My Grandma Arvina, bought us an Atari in 1995 at a yard sale.
Yeah.
And I learned to play on that before we got the OG Nintendo.
We got the Nintendo the first year it came out, but I want to say that was early 90s.
Yes.
So, I mean, but like my mom, we had every video game system ever. And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what she did with them after we got the newest one. Like, they're not in storage because I've gone through all of her things in storage. So, like, they're not there. But, like, I really want to play classic Nintendo.
She probably sold it like my mom did.
I'm sure that's what she did, so she could buy the next one. But like some of the like the Pizza Hut reference, like I remember going to Pizza Hut and like I can remember the smell of going into Pizza Hut.
Yes,
and you're like playing on those like the tabletop
and
game.
like the tabletop game is greasy, and the controllers greasy. The last kid that did it,
and there's something spilled on it. Well, my mom actually not this year for Christmas, not 2021 for Christmas, but 2020 for Christmas actually bought my boys a classic Pac-Man arcade tabletop.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so it is very cool. It has like 8 different games, but it's classic Pac-Man and classic like a whole bunch of other games from the Pac-Man company. I think it's Capcom or something.
Yeah.
So like I got those references, but like for me, the biggest struggle was like James Halliday he didn't have a specific thing that he liked. Like he was like, you know, all the 80s things, but like the nerd culture wasn't like geek culture it's a part of who I am now.
Same.
And it's a part of who I was as a teenager. But it wasn't who I was in the 80s. So I didn't grow up with that the way that like James Halliday did.
Right. Oh. I mean, I don't know. When MTV was my best friend, so I kind of started early.
I watched Nickelodeon. Lots of
We got
Nickelodeon.
I
Lots of Nickelodeon.
Okay, I'm going to go on a tirade, and we need to go to the next question because we're 20 minutes in.
So I will say, all of the gaming stuff, and this book is pretty like gaming heavy. I am not now,
Yeah.
nor have I ever been a gamer. We never
Yeah.
had any game systems in our house, or like, you know, sometimes
really?
going over to a friend's house I would play, but like, you know, we weren't opposed to it. It wasn't like against the rules or something. I just never got into it. So I think probably
Yeah.
a lot of the video game references, until he was doing something real basic like Pac-Man, were pretty much lost on me.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah.
But
Like,
like
I
you were saying,
feel
there's so
like-
much other stuff too.
Well, we'll come to this question a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a gamer.
Sorry to derail you.
I've always been a gamer. Sorry.
I'm not really, like, I wouldn't call myself a gamer. I'll play games occasionally, but like,
When Halo came out, I used to do Halo tournaments.
oh no.
Back in the day.
That's not for me. I've literally
Like-
never played Halo in my life. I don't like first-person shooter games. They make me feel nauseous. So
Why? Too much anxiety?
no, you would think that would be the reason, but like I get really dizzy in like
Oh, yeah.
first-person games. So I just need Mario jumping over, you know,
Yoshi?
mushrooms and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on the next question. All right, this book takes place 22 years from now. That's not that long.
No.
22 years from now. And in 22 years, do you think we'll have the technology to create an MMO like the Oasis, complete with schools, quests, and just about everything else you can dream of?
I don't think we're that close. I mean, they just got virtual reality glasses that are real. And people are walking into flapping walls. Like, we are not smart enough yet to handle something like the Oasis.
It doesn't seem like the people in this book are very smart to handle this technology either.
No.
Let's be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like 22 years ago,
I mean-
we're talking like late 90s. So the
Yes,
change
right.
since then is
Right.
pretty
And, like-
incredible. Like we barely even had the
I
internet
mean, I didn't
back
even
then.
have a. That's exactly what I was going to say. I didn't even have a computer until I was in college. I got a laptop for a graduation present to go to college. I graduated high school in 2000. And like the internet, you know, before that, like if I was playing on the internet at a friend's house, you know, you had the AOL dial up like that.
Right.
You know, you guys remember the noises. You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And so really, right, exactly. So like that's like half my life ago. So
Right.
we're going to be in our 60s when this book takes place.
I don't know. Thank you.
I don't know. I feel like it could be there. So I asked Tom this question, my husband, for those of you who are new to our podcast. My husband, Tom, is our editor
extraordinaire.
and he, you know, he's awesome. If you haven't listened to his short little recap episode that
Go
he
listen
made
to
for
it. It's
Molly and I's,
freaking
go
hilarious.
Listen. It's so cute. It's hilarious. He's
It
wonderful.
was
All
very
good
sweet
things.
of him to make.
So I asked him this question and he said we already actually do have the technology to do this. And I was like, you think that the servers wouldn't crash? And he said that games like dang it, now I already forgot what game I'm talking about. World of Warcraft, like they already have the capacity to do that.
Mhm.
My contention with that is I don't think that it's not just a game. The Oasis is not just a game. Like it's
a lifestyle.
Yes, exactly. It's a complete lifestyle. Like people are literally working there. They are going to school there. This is not what happens in MMOs like World of Warcraft. They are a game. Yes, people do play them obsessively.
Did we describe to the audience like what the Oasis actually is?
I don't think we did.
Okay.
No.
So
Do you want me to give
we
a
probably
stab at
should.
it? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and describe it for us.
So basically, in the year, what's the year that the book
2044.
2044.
2045.
There we go. So
yeah.
we're talking 20, 25 years in the future from now, where we're living now.
Mm-hmm.
There's basically a virtual world that's been created by this corporation, and more than a virtual world, a whole virtual universe. And most people on the planet have these VR goggles and gloves that they put on, and they end up spending most of their time in this virtual universe. And apparently, the way that they describe it in the book, super realistic. You can almost like not tell the difference between reality and the virtual universe. And then this universe has all of these different planets on it. So they're like planets dedicated to education, where it's nothing but schools, so that kids can attend school online in this virtual world. And then they're like adventure planet. Like they have like the whole Star Wars universe recreated and the whole Star Trek universe recreated and Lord of the Rings
Firefly
world, Middle Earth or whatever recreated. Sure, Molly's saying Firefly.
Like
I'm just going to start saying spaceship. Spaceship.
Spaceship. I'm a leaf on the wind.
And recreational places, and people have meetings and do their business, and to the point where where like basically everybody on the planet is plugged into this thing for most of their waking hours. And
so much so that the Oasis credits are actually more valuable than the US dollar.
And if you go to school,
like somewhat interchangeable too.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you go to school or work on any of these planets, the equipment's provided, so it's nicer than the stuff you buy in the stores.
Right.
You can get bodysuits.
This actually leads me to my next question, Molly. So I'm so glad you brought that up. So James Halliday and Ogden Morrow, who is was his business partner at Gregarious Enterprises, they give their game away for basically nothing. They don't charge a monthly fee, and the consoles come for only a quarter. Like that's all you have to pay to get a console. And if you, like Molly said, if you attend school in the Oasis, you actually get your haptic gloves, your visor, and your console for free. So is this altruism believable in today's tech world?
Absolutely. Flippin' not. I've caught myself there. Absolutely not. I edited myself. Absolutely not. Look at Elon Musk and frickin' what's his face over at Amazon. They have enough money that they could change the homeless issue or hunger in the United States or pay their flippin' taxes. And you know what they do? They make themselves bloody rockets so they could go to space.
I have to correct you on that, Molly, because Elon Musk did not make a rocket so he could go to space.
But
he made rockets. No, he didn't. He made rockets so we could go to space, so that the space program could continue with NASA. He's doing a lot of stuff for NASA, and the telescope that just launched on Christmas, that went in one of his rockets as well. So you can't hate on Elon Musk. I'm sorry. He's got a super brain like my child. I gotta plug on him. I'm sorry.
He put a car in space to promote it. He literally put a Tesla in
all right. So he put a car in space to promote it. But it's not like he's not using his money for good too. It's not like he just went to space to say he went to space.
Sure.
Let me ask you another question though. To kind of answer your question with a question. So in the book, they've created the Oasis, right? And given the stuff away for free or whatever use is free, and the visor kit, whatever, only costs 25 cents or whatever, right? And doing that has made them the richest, most powerful people in the world. So if you do something that on the surface is generous, but in reality it makes you the richest, most powerful person in the world, is that altruism?
It's clever.
Oh my gosh.
That doesn't seem that generous anymore when you look at it like that, right?
I was not prepared.
Thank you, Isaac, for standing up for me.
To be fair, they were already the richest people in the world when they made the Oasis. So that was part of the reason why they could give it away for so cheap. I just don't imagine that any tech corporation, even if they gave away the consoles and the visor and the haptic gloves, even if they gave those away for incredibly low price, even if they gave it away for a quarter, they're not going to not charge a monthly fee.
Right.
Like, you can't, it's not sustainable. Like, how would you sustain
have
servers, the electricity to continue running? And yes, they had other programs. I mean, I guess what they were doing was they were selling the other things within the Oasis, right? So you could get upgrades to your equipment. And that's where
they created their own universe, their own goods and services that can be replicated just by copying computer code, and then sold for basically real money that they created and made so valuable and so stable that it's just as good or better than real money. So.
Right, and they literally have a president and vice president that are elected within the Oasis.
Right.
Yes,
that are the governing body of the Oasis.
Which Will Wheaton's in that.
Right, it's very meta. Will Wheaton is
the narrator,
president, and the narrator of the audiobook, so it's very meta.
It's super meta.
But I mean, I just don't see that happening. And I think you're right, Isaac. Like, I don't really think it's altruism. Now, I don't know, because Ogden Morrow was making, I cannot remember what the company was, but he had the learning, the stuff.
Yes,
learning stuff,
the
educational
stuff with his wife.
With his wife, and they weren't charging for that either.
Which created the basis for the schools. The whole reason they have the schools was because of that stuff.
And if you read the second book, which honestly, listeners, I do not recommend. It's a complete letdown and disappointment. But if you read the second book, you learn more about Ogden Morrow, because he's more of a central character in the second book.
I did actually read the second book, so I'm trying to remember not to bring stuff from the second book into this discussion, because
Can I ask, were you disappointed in the sequel, or did you like it, or?
A little disappointed. I liked I liked certain, without going too much into it, I liked a lot of aspects of it. Overall, a little disappointed. I think they spent way too much time on Prince. The whole Prince really battle scene was a little much, but.
Well, I don't actually have this question in the list of questions that I sent to all of you ahead of time, but I do want to insert this now, because we've been talking about the second book, and this isn't about the second book, Molly, so it's okay. But my question is, this book starts with what I described like a lot of hopelessness.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And do you feel like that is more characteristic of our author, like really inserting himself in there, or do you think that this is just the character he developed? I mean, our character is, he talks about, we've destroyed the planet. God is
realistic
not real.
In my POV.
And everyone is screwed, and we should just all basically give up.
In my opinion,
that's and like his realistic. Only hope for success, like everyone on Earth is plugged into the Oasis, and like basically your only hope for any level of success or happiness in life is winning the lottery against like astronomical odds. I know it's a game, not a drawing, but like with 7 billion people on Earth or whatever, like you have a 1 in 7 billion chance of being that person, and that's your only source of hope.
What he wants to do with it is get himself off planet.
Right.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to help save the world. He wants to leave it. And
as the book evolves, he doesn't even want that anymore, right? He plans to kill himself when he wins.
Right.
Like he plans to win and climb up to the top of the tallest tower, give all the money to somebody who's a kid in need that grew up the way he did, and throw himself off of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty hopeless when your life plan is to win a video game and then kill yourself.
So you could die
and then kill yourself.
Yeah.
Honestly,
just made the book sound really dark.
I mean, it kind of is. Think about the world.
For me, that's the hardest part of this book, because we've talked about on our podcast, Isaac, several times that I am a Christian, and like that is central to who I am. So reading a book where the main character is an atheist and so like solid in his beliefs, and like this is all that there is, like you will die, it's fine if you kill yourself, like that, to me, that was the part of this book that was hard for me. I don't like reading things that are so hopeless, especially in what I consider to be a post-apocalyptic book, which is like my favorite genre is post-apocalyptic. I love the world has gone to crap, everything's horrible, and somebody rises up and saves the day. And our main character, who's supposed to be our savior character, he doesn't even believe that there's even any reason to finish.
Right.
That feels realistic to me.
Yeah, and that actually kind of turned me off to the book early on in the book, was his discussion of atheism. Like, oh, my life would have been so much better if, nobody would have lied to me about all this stuff and just told me that there is no God. And I'm like, wait. This is supposed to be like a young adult book, supposedly. And we're making these statements as though they're fact of things that I don't believe in. I'm a Christian as well. And like the author just being so bold in a message apparently to adolescents of the hopelessness of your existence. And I was like, that's kind of a turnoff on the book, like pretty early on.
I don't know. I'm an agnostic.
Actually, could
I actually think this is a really good place
to me.
You heathen, Molly. I feel like this is a good place to bring up the question that you had, Isaac.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Qualifies.
So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So do you want to ask it, or do you? You want me to read it
sure.
for you?
So I know I have it written here somewhere, but basically the question was what actually makes a book, and there are kind of probably several different perspectives on this. There's going to be like the official librarian perspective, the actual textbook answer, but then maybe some more subtle things about what actually makes a book. We could even say children's literature versus young adult literature versus adult literature versus what was the other one that you told me about? New adult literature.
Middle grade?
New adult.
Which I guess is between young
genre.
adult and adult. So do you want to just lead off with
grade and there's YA and
right.
Yeah, so for those of you who are new, I'm a librarian, so I'm going to give you what the official librarian answer is. And I don't consider this book to be YA. I consider this book to be adult. And it actually wasn't published as a YA book, mostly because of language, but also because Wade is almost 18 when the book starts. And also there's a lot of sex in it. Not necessarily.
Really is.
There's not necessarily sex with a person, but there's a lot of sex in it. And
more sex than I thought it would be.
Yeah. So to me, this would be adult. But now that we have the new genre, which is NA, new adult, that genre is for people who the characters are between the ages of 17 and like 25. And so it's like youngish adults. So it's like people who are no longer in high school, college age, maybe having their first relationship, that kind of stuff. So this would fall under that category, even though that category didn't exist when it was written. Something is YA when the characters are younger. Our YA today is a lot more older leaning than what it was when I was first teaching English, which was in 2004. And now our middle grade, it has had a rise, and it's more 16 to 14 is more middle grade, even though middle grade is like 12 to 14. Mm-hmm. So a lot of YA is much more mature now. Right. And part of that has to do with just the publishing world.
Right. And I was going to actually touch on that.
Yeah. I was going to say that they're looking for commonalities. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to use Twilight as an example because we love Twilight. Well, Molly and I do. I don't know if you like it, Isaac, but Molly and I do. And when you release something as sensational as Twilight, or you can even use Harry Potter for that example, people in the publishing world are looking for other books that fall under that genre, and then they're going to push it out to the same people. Right. So even though it's older leaning, it has the same audience appeal. So they push it out that way. And Molly's a writer, so she can talk more about that too.
So when I went to school, we had a couple different classes about the publishing world, intent, defining your genre, all that jazz, right? The one thing I learned was you're going to start as a writer deciding your genre, right? Mm-hmm. My current work in progress, I would say it's new adult to regular fiction, right? But if I turn this into a publisher and they see it in a different light, they will give the writer edits and they will change the genre based off of what they feel is public need, their need, and what they think will sell. Mm-hmm. So I could turn it into a book that has cursing and sex and, gratuitous violence, and they could give me back a pile of notes, and it could turn into a middle grade like that. Right. So it really depends on the trends of the time to make a book defined. Right. So when did this publish?
I'll look up when it did. I have the book right here with
depending on when this book was published, really defines what it is at that point and where it goes on the shelf.
2011.
Yeah, so that was the peak of YA. That's why it got designated as YA.
Yeah, there wasn't NA at the time.
No, and that's why it got the YA stature, even though it's definitely has adult undertones.
Mm-hmm. This is the copy from the library. This is from the fiction section. It is not from YA. And I've seen
it in YA at the library here.
Well, I'm a middle school librarian, and I was shocked that we had this in the library where
I am
too. The librarian, because it's not one I would have purchased for the collection, even though it's a very good book.
So
personally, I probably wouldn't recommend it. Oh, go ahead. Oh, personally, I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't recommend it for like middle schoolers for sure. Actually, when I bought the book, it said for ages 6+. And then I start reading it. Whoa. So I have to assume that was a typo, and it probably meant 16 plus, which is probably closer to the appropriate age for the book.
What would you designate it as? Now that you've read it as a reader, what would you designate it as, Isaac?
I would say definitely not young adult. Maybe just honestly straight fiction. And also, for anybody who's thinking about reading the book, we mentioned that it has a lot of sex in it. It's not like graphic though. It usually just like makes a statement that it happened. And usually, like most of it is also happening like in this virtual world, which made me think like, okay, so we have these like whole virtual planets of like violence because they're a video game planet. So, and apparently that's okay because it's just a video game, right? So, and it like you mentioned, there are these virtual brothels too. And like without getting too much into that, because I could really get us off the rails, I'm like, is there a difference between the way that we see the violence and that being like totally okay and we kind of overlook it because they're just video game characters shooting each other versus the sex in the book, even though it's just still happening in the same virtual environment?
But for me, I don't let my kids play violent video games. Like they are playing Mario. Like I have little kids. My kids are 8 and 5. So they're playing like Mario, which I guess he jumps on Goomba's head and maybe that's a little violent. But it's not shooter games. We don't own any shooter games.
He also takes mushrooms.
The most graphic... Yeah, he does. The most graphic game we have is Super Smash Brothers, which is just Mario characters that like beat each other up. Right. So it's a fighting game. But like for me, I don't think... I would, like, if the Oasis existed, if this was a real place, my kids would not be going to school there. They would not be spending all their time on it. It would 100% not be a part of their
everyday
life. It would not be an overarching part of their life. I can't imagine that I wouldn't end up working there because for me to be a librarian virtually, that would be awesome. Like I could work from home. I did that during the pandemic. Our library was closed. I worked from home. I was doing story times virtually with kids. I loved that. It was amazing. And so I could see like that being a part of my life. It would be a great opportunity for my husband, who's a disabled vet, to like work from home. But our kids would not be immersed in it because I wouldn't want them to go to the places that I wouldn't want them to be.
So jumping back to the violence that Isaac was talking about, it does matter in the Oasis because zeroing out when you die means you go bankrupt. You are literally, your pockets are empty. Life is over for you. You have no finances. So the violence does matter in the Oasis, unlike a regular video game, because it will change your life. Now about the kids. Again, back to me being a heathen. Big's girls are 11 and almost 13. Oh, that's gross. Anyways, I don't like it. Anyways, I just taught Livy Halo, right? So they play Halo, they play Fortnite, and what else? Oh, Minecraft. That's the big one for them. But they prefer the building mode, not like the scary creeper whatever thing mode. But story mode, yeah, they prefer that over like where the zombies or whatever are getting them. I don't know. They talk about it for hours. It doesn't matter. I'm more concerned about like Piper loves post-apocalyptic books. Hunger Games. She loves mythology-based books.
Love it.
I feel like she reads more violent things in between a book than she does see in the video games. So I don't know. Violence is definitely
I feel like you could pull yourself away from it more if you're reading the book, though. Right. It's happening to someone else. Even if it's a first-person book, it's happening to someone else. But when you're playing the video game, you are the person doing it.
Yeah.
So, I don't dig that.
I'm sorry, to bring us back to the question, is that where you're going? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was actually going to move on to another question, but if you have something you want to say about that, that's fine.
So you kind of talked about the library definition of what young adult literature is, and I had some other thoughts too, as far as like kind of general rules when it comes to classifying something as like children's, young adult, older adult, adult literature, or whatever. And a couple of those thoughts were, how clear is the author when they're being prescriptive versus descriptive? So, for example, Wade's statements about his atheist beliefs. I don't think that the author here was clearly being descriptive, saying this is just what the character believes. It really came across as being prescriptive, saying this is what you should believe. And
you should believe, yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I think the younger your intended audience is, the more clear you have to be when you're being prescriptive, saying this is what you should do or what you should believe, versus descriptive, saying this is just what a character believes or just what a character did. And then the same thing when it comes to like the character's decisions and actions. The younger your audience is, I think the more you have a responsibility to be more clear that decision was wrong, that decision was right, or that action was wrong, that action was right. And as your audience matures, they have more of a capacity to make those judgments for themselves. Does that make sense?
I'm going to argue with you there.
Well, I mean, I feel like what you're saying is what I want the answer to be, but I don't feel like that's the answer.
No, and I was going to argue that,
because
actually.
The publishing world does not give a crap about that. They don't care about raising kids.
Right.
They care about selling books. Money.
And also, you as the grown-up in that child's life, it is your job to pay attention to what they're reading, pay attention to what they're viewing, all of that jazz. So if you're concerned about viewpoints in a book, that is on you as a parent, not the author. The author is writing what the author's going to write. But April and I love a book called Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Oh,
that book, so much. Love that book. That book has opposing political views than April.
Very much so.
And
completely against what I believe.
And it is very heavy-handed when it comes to those political views. But it doesn't take away from what she feels about the book or how she feels about it. But her brain, her dome, can process the difference, right?
But Molly, that book isn't a children's book. It's new adults. So we assume that adults can decipher those things.
Right.
So I mean,
my point is, if I'm handing a book to my kid and I think it has opposing views to my child, my life, I'm going to have a conversation with my kid about it.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
The only
100%.
thing is,
go ahead.
I want you to have those conversations. I'm not speaking to the two of you. I'm speaking to you in general. I want you to have those conversations with your kids. I want you to talk to your kids about books and
not everybody does though.
Why things don't align with your beliefs. But I do not want you to ban the book.
Right. Oh my God.
That is not, you can choose for your kids. You can't choose for other kids.
Rule number one is being a book bestie.
I think we're probably actually
anti-book banning.
I am anti-book banning. Yes.
Welcome to the Book Bestie family then.
We're probably actually kind of saying the same thing, where I would add to that, where the way that I'm defining like young adult versus children's is with that caveat that I'm not going to take the publishing industry's word for it, and that as a parent, like you were saying,
absolutely,
I need to define what's appropriate young adult literature kind of based on my standards of what that's going to teach my kid. And if there's something difficult or controversial or whatever in that book, then I need to be taking responsibility for having those conversations with my kids.
Absolutely.
100%.
And I think that the reason it started 6 and Up on Amazon, not sponsored, just to like circle back to that real quick, is probably because the vocabulary in this book is really not that difficult.
No, it is.
A 6-year-old could read
so
like,
basic.
Probably not a 6-year-old, because I have a 5-year-old who's rolling on 6 and that boy can't read yet. But, it also could have been a typo. I don't ever go by what Amazon says.
No,
because
I trust them barely.
They don't know what they're talking about.
They don't even deliver to my house right. They deliver 3 doors down.
Well, this is why we're not sponsored by them. We don't.
A lot of times they deliver my stuff 1 door down, but out here 1 door down is like half a mile away.
Nice.
Yeah, 1 door down is literally like 5 steps from me.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next question if you guys are okay with
that. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I don't think we're gonna get through everything I had planned, but I am totally fine with that because we are having an awesome conversation. But I do want to talk about this because I know Molly has opinions on it. So I want to talk about Artemis. That's her username. Her avatar's name is Artemis, or Artie for short, and her real name is Samantha. She's a fellow Gunter, just like all the other characters in this book. And she's actually arguably better than Wade. She's actually
100%.
the first one to find where the first key is, even though she isn't the first to get it. They fall in love in this story because, of course, they do. That's Molly saying she hates that.
Did you tell the listeners what a gunter is?
A gunter is yes, I did. A gunter is the person that they're hunting for Halliday's egg.
Right,
That's
so
okay.
it's an egg hunter shortened to
egg hunter. Right. Yeah. So she's so is this narrative necessary to a side?
No.
Or does the love story diminish Artie's role as a respectable gunter?
It is ridiculous. Not every story needs a flapping, fracking love story.
But I want you to tell me one that doesn't have it. Tell me a book that doesn't have it that you've enjoyed, Molly. Tell me.
The Crucible.
That does, though.
Fuck.
And I hate The Crucible, so you're wrong anyway.
You're wrong. You don't get to tell me what I like and don't like.
I'm your best friend. I do.
All right.
It's for
all right.
Best
you want to go there? You want to go there?
Best for you.
Look who's talking. Anyways, all I'm saying is it takes away from it. Her validity as being the better player is diminished by the fact that she has a relationship with Wade. She is connected to Wade. She is not. It's going back to frickin' Harry Potter, and when they omit that the schools are not multigender, okay?
Yes, because the only way a woman could be in the Goblet of Fire is if she's at an only girls' school.
I'm just saying,
it's incredibly sexist.
It's sexist, and it
are we still talking about The Crucible?
Her role.
No.
Anyways, what I'm saying.
Welcome to our pod. It's a mess.
It's a mess. I'm saying it's not necessary. Did I like it? I liked it. But is it necessary? Absolutely not. Would the story still be good if they were besties? Absolutely. I'm just saying it's not always necessary.
We do have that relationship with a woman who is his bestie.
But he doesn't know. Right. She catfished him.
It doesn't matter. She's also better. H, we find out as the story goes on.
But she had to play as a man to be better.
Again, it's still sexist. But H is Wade's best friend. And we don't actually know anything about H other than he is an amazing fighter. And H stands for whatever his first name is. We learn later in the book that H is actually a woman. She's an African-American woman who is also a lesbian. And that's all important to the story because her mom signs her up on the Oasis as a man who is white. And then when she comes out to her mom has her own prejudices and like, no, you're out, you're gone. So she's kind of on the run and does her own thing. But in the Oasis, Wade still refers to H as a man, as a him, because that is how he presents himself there. And outside the Oasis, H is a woman. But we do have that perspective of here's a woman, even though we don't know it's a woman. I agree with you. I think it diminishes Artie's role, but I really love their story and it's super cute. And I also met my husband online, so that might be a little bit about.
You might be a little biased.
A little biased. We didn't meet on like World of Warcraft though. We met on eHarmony. So
well, it's a dating website, but you
don't. It's like an actual dating website.
Okay, before her and I just argue back and forth, Isaac, how did you feel about this?
I think they could have left a lot of it out, and there were certain parts in the book when it just like got a little distracting. I'm like, okay, move on with the story. I get it. I think what the author was trying to do, though,
you guys like each other.
Right, exactly. You've kind of already hit on this with I think he was really going for the contrast, maybe the compare and contrast between Artie and H and Wade's relationship with each of them, because Wade's having this love relationship with Artemis, right? Whereas H is his best friend, right? Mm-hmm. H turns out to be a woman, even though he thought that H was a guy. And he's having this love relationship with Artemis, in the virtual universe, right? And H brings up, well, what if Artie's a guy?
He's a dude.
Right. Which is kind of funny that H is the one bringing that up, which I thought was a little bit of foreshadowing about H not being
who totally was.
She was portraying themselves to be on the, in this virtual world.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
I
I think that contrast was an important part of the story and that dynamic, but yeah, too much time spent on teenage romance.
It did not need. Yeah, it did not need to be a primary focus.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be.
I liked it, and I thought it actually helped push the story along. And I think it's one of the things I liked about
it did help push the story along.
But I am not usually a reader of romance novels in the traditional sense, but I love books that have romance in them. So for me, that was like, oh, it's post-apocalyptic. It's got all this action. It's got all this 80s pop culture. And there's a love story. Wonderful. It kind of lost me in the middle. There were like a few chapters, especially when he buys like the sex robot. Like there were a few chapters in there. I was like, okay, I get it.
Right.
Like he's lonely. He is depressed. He has locked himself in this room. Like I've had enough of this.
He lost all that. He was like,
now, the one thing that I did, right. The one thing that I did really like about the love story aspect of it is that was like the one thing in the book that gave Wade a taste of the fact that there could be something good outside of the Oasis.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because she existed there, but she also existed in the real world.
Right.
Right, and that's like what he really wanted was to actually meet her in the real world, actually get to know her, and actually have a real relationship in the real world. So, because other than that, the entire book, anything that happens outside the Oasis is bad.
Right.
Well, and he has nobody, right?
He's never even met his best friend.
I mean, his parents are dead. Mm-hmm. His aunt treats him like trash,
and then
she
dead.
dies,
and then she's dead,
and then the rest of his people are online, and he doesn't know them.
Right?
It's just I don't know.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on because we're running out of time. So I do want to try to get through a couple more questions because I know Isaac has some questions too. I want to talk a little bit about IOI. So they're the evil empire in this story. And the Sixers are essentially exploiting the spirit of the game. So the Sixers are a hired group of people who are holiday experts, gaming experts, all these different types of experts who have hacked rigs, who basically the game doesn't have any rules. And so what they're doing is they're trying to win as a corporation so that they can take over the Oasis as a corporation. Nolan Sorrento is kind of the leader of this group. He's not like the top of IOI, but he's high enough in that he's high enough in. And he takes things really far. So he blows up Wade's house and he orders the murdering of Dioto, which is one of the
flippin' devastating.
Yeah, the High Five, which are the top 5 Gunters at the beginning of the book. Is this a believable storyline for greed to push a corporation this far to do horrible things?
Yes, in a post-apocalyptic world, absolutely. I mean, Wade even
I would say even in our world now. Yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Wade expresses how insignificant real world politics are, right? Mm-hmm. They have no power anymore. The president of the United States is like a figurehead. He doesn't even really matter. Will Wheaton has more power than him. Right. Will flippin' Wheaton. Right. What kind of world is it that Will Wheaton has more power than the president of the United States? I love Will Wheaton. Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted. But he probably doesn't want to be the president of the United States.
Yeah.
Anyways, what do you think, Isaac? Since I'm just rambling.
No, I think that part is 100% believable and probably goes on in our real world now more than we would like to think. And people who are like extreme. I'm not talking about just people who are. I'm not talking about 1% wealth. I'm talking the absolute most rich and powerful people in the world are, I'm sure, to a certain extent above the law and using their power to do terrible things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah.
That's bleak, but I would agree.
It's
all right.
real.
So we learn a lot about Halliday through this book, even though he is not alive to contribute to the story. We also learn a lot about his former business partner, Ogden Morrow. Do these two remind you guys of anybody in pop culture? I have a few answers for myself, but I'm wondering.
I read your answers. I think they're good. Go for it.
Hit us.
So I would say Sheldon and Leonard from Big Bang Theory.
Okay, yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Sherlock and Watson, the BBC edition.
Okay.
And Jobs and Wozniak, but only really because of the gaming, the tech aspect.
That's the one I was thinking.
The falling out. And they actually reference Jobs and Wozniak in the book too.
And the one that's still alive reminds me a lot of Woz.
Yeah, and I think he's probably even named and characterized after him because
he reminds me a lot of him.
His name is Ogden Morrow, and he goes by the great and powerful Og, and Wozniak
that goes as Woz.
Yeah. So I think so then I have one more thing, and then I know Isaac has a few. But I wanted to talk about the movie. Isaac, you've seen it. Molly, have you seen it?
I watched it last night. I have a lot of feelings.
Yay. So, Isaac, you saw it before you had read the book. I read the book.
Actually, I read the book first.
I hated the movie.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. So I read the book and then saw the movie, and I was incredibly disappointed in the movie because
100%.
20 minutes in before something happens from the book, but I really liked the movie. I don't know how to feel about that.
I like the movie standalone. If I hadn't read the book, I would have loved the movie. Mm-hmm. I would have loved the references. I love the like we get Breakfast Club music, we get 80s music, we get the games, we get all the things. And but now I have the book in my head and it's so much better in there. So why would I want this knockoff, right?
I think the big difference for me was, and I'm not sure we've talked about this much. Basically, the storyline of the book is Wade and the other Gunters are trying to solve this series of puzzles, and they earn a key, and then use the key to open the gate, and then there's another puzzle. So
then you have to get the gate,
Right, there's a series of basically 6 puzzles that they have to solve, right? And I think the puzzles in the book were just better than the puzzles that they used in the movie because they didn't use the same ones. They kind of just made up their own.
The one that they start with, the whole car racing thing is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. There's no way that in 5 years somebody wouldn't get that. Come on,
bullshit flag. Okay, so the one thing that really bothered me is
it also wasn't a 1980s car racing game.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna get spoilers for both the book and movie. New season, new round of spoilers, gang. In the book, the whole point of it is winning together, right? Mm-hmm. The last key, you have to have 3 keys.
3 is a magic number.
Right. You have to have those 3. That's working together. That was his whole point. That was the whole point of any of this, is he wanted you to know that you needed others. He didn't want people to die alone, and that's the whole metaphor, right?
Well, that's actually what Halliday realized at the end of his life, was that he needed Ogden Morrow and Kira Morrow. He needed them.
Right. And what happens in the movie? Absolutely none of that.
Absolutely none of that.
And it defeats the purpose of the message of the movie. Of the book.
I also don't like the way in the movie he gets the quarter. He gets
a quarter,
that. Which ends up being
cute.
He gets a quarter, which ends up being
from the curator,
an extra life. In the movie, he gets it from the curator, but in the book, he plays Pac-Man and has to play a perfect game and actually earns the quarter that way. And he doesn't know it's an extra life until everybody dies except for him, and he's like, "What the mother crap happened here?"
Right,
he got an extra life. I thought that was clever, and the way that they did it, where he just the curator flicked it to him.
But he won a bet against the curator, and the
curator in the movie is also Ogden Morrow, so they brought him
which
in
I
more.
like that.
They did that because it was Simon Pegg playing him. They didn't do it because it was made
Simon
more
Pegg.
sense. Well, I mean, yeah, who doesn't? It's hard not to. All right. Anyway, Isaac, do you want to go through any of your questions that you have?
Yeah, and we've actually already talked about a couple of them. Let me pull my notes out real quick.
And then no problem.
Oh, so I actually just came across this quote from Orson Scott Card, who's a classic sci-fi writer, right? And he said that the difference between he said if you see rivets, it's sci-fi. If you see trees, it's fantasy. And the question that I wrote down, which we don't necessarily have to answer, is this truly sci-fi? And what's your definition of sci-fi? And maybe this happens more in the second book too, but there are all these fantasy universes. There's all of this Dungeons and Dragons stuff, which that's fantasy, not sci-fi. And there's a lot of emphasis on fantasy stuff here. Or is it even important to distinguish between the two? Go ahead. I have to breathe.
I don't think it's either one.
I think this book can be defined in 3 different windows. It can be post-apocalyptic, it can be sci-fi, and it can be fantasy. I think with the video game aspect, it is more fantasy. Because living in a video game is like a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Living in a virtual reality realm is fantasy. Then sorry.
The other genre it could be is alternate reality, because it supposes that in 22 years we will have had the technology since the time that we are now. Basically, I can't remember when he made the Oasis, but I mean, I could do a quick Google of it, but basically the tech in the Oasis already exists at this point. That we are living. So it's alternate reality too. I don't think it's sci-fi. I had a very long discussion with Tom about this because he was like, absolutely, this is sci-fi.
Oasis was created in 2012.
Okay, so there you go. This reality that we're in, so it's an alternate reality book too. To me, it's dystopian because that's dystopian, post-apocalyptic. That's my genre of choice anyway. So that's where I would put it. But I do think this is one that we've used this term before, Molly. It's genre fluid.
Yes.
It goes between a bunch of different genres.
I think this is the start of a new genre.
Part of the reason that I asked is because
kids are getting into... Sorry.
No, that's okay. Part of the reason I asked is because I was thinking about it, and I really couldn't nail down any good reason to call it sci-fi, because all of the sci-fi stuff that happens in the book is happening inside of a video game. It's not like actually happening, like, you know, in Star Wars and Star Trek and all the Robert Heinlein stuff and all the Orson Scott Card stuff. That the science fiction-y stuff is actually happening. Here, it's just part of a video game.
For me, it's not sci-fi if it doesn't happen in space. Like, if there's not some element of it happening in space, and virtual space does not count. For me, that's how I define sci-fi. If it happens in space, it's sci-fi.
Okay, so I think, like I was saying, I think this is the start of a new genre. We are seeing more and more books based off video games, featuring video games being the primary focus. Books that are like The Witcher. It was a book before it was a video game, but now people are reading the books because of the video games. You are having this crossover. I
didn't even know it was a video game. I just thought it was a Netflix series.
Yeah, and it was a book too. So it was book, video game, now Netflix series. But then you have Minecraft, where now there is a plethora of middle grade books that are Minecraft rated. You have books that are based off of Link in Legend of Zelda. You have Mario books. We are going to see a whole new genre in the next 20 years, and it's going to be called something like 8-byte or Gigabyte or some stupid shit crap like that is video game related. It's gonna be its own thing, and I just think we're not there yet.
I don't think it's new though, because I feel like that has existed in middle grade and Juve Fic for a long time.
Right. It just doesn't have a name. I think we're just waiting for someone that's like more important than me to give it a name.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you call it, Isaac? Do you think it's sci-fi?
I definitely wouldn't call it sci-fi, because, like I was saying, all the sci-fi stuff that happens is just inside of this video game. It'd be like writing a book about somebody. Well, I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy right now, but yeah, there's no like real sci-fi stuff. Now, Ernest Cline did write another book that I also read just to like get a feel for the author, called Armada, which is, I don't know, have you read that one? That one is solidly sci-fi. And it has some similar aspects to it, but one of the things that I liked about that one, not to derail us, was the amount of hope in the world, in the universe that he creates, and a lot more hope in that book, as opposed to, even though it really doesn't show it right away. In the end, there is hope, and that one ends up being like true sci-fi with like actual like spaceships and stuff.
Yeah, that's why I haven't read that one. As much as I love seeing sci-fi movies, I'm not a sci-fi book fan. Like, I really don't read sci-fi.
I need to visualize it. I need somebody.
I really don't either, which is kind of funny that I'm doing these two books for our podcast episode, because I really don't read sci-fi.
That's funny. That's my husband's like genre of choice.
Yeah.
But Ernest Cline, our author, just a side note, he was born and raised in the town next to where I grew up, in Ashland, Ohio, and Mansfield, Ohio is like right here. We're like beside each other. And Ashland, Ohio is like more Amish country than Mansfield is. But now he lives in Austin, which seems about right.
Yeah.
Nobody stays in Ohio.
Nobody that lives in Austin's from Austin.
One of the other things that I wrote down that kind of struck me, and I don't know, maybe there's not a good way to put this into a question form, but I think one of the aspects of the appeal of this book is you think about high school, right? And they're like your classic like groups of kids in high school. There's the jocks and the nerds and right. And I think that one thing that this book did is, which made it appealing, especially to a certain group, is taking a group that often feels outcast and making them making them cool, right? They're the cool ones. They're the heroes of this story, even though
like the gamers are ruling the world.
Exactly.
Right.
And
and everybody's characterized that way too, because Wade's a little bit overweight, and Artie has a Weinstein birthmark, which is on your face, and H is a lesbian Black woman, which could be an outcast in so many realms. So I and Ogden Morrow and James Halliday were the outcasts themselves when they were kids.
And he was autistic, right?
They don't say that, but he was 100%.
They insinuated he's on spectrum, though.
I would say he reminds me a lot of what James will be.
It definitely gave me, it read Asperger's to me.
Oh, yeah. I think that, I think they mentioned that, he was never diagnosed, but probably, and that's part of the reason why he reminds me of Sheldon as well. I'm not crazy. My mother had me tested. But I think he was probably Asperger's. And at the time they were still labeling Asperger's. So that would have been his label, but, or his diagnosis, but no, he doesn't actually have one.
So before we wrap,
absolutely was.
So before we wrap up, I have one complaint. Every time this author goes into a new location, he takes several pages, minutes, if you're listening to the audiobook, filling out a world. We do not need the description of every fracking chair in a room. He wasted so much space doing that. So much space!
Molly! You are not allowed to say that and be a fan of Harry Potter. I am sorry, but J.K. Rowling is the worst at writing a world, and you love it, so you are not... I'm giving you this. This is for you.
It's different!
It's not the same.
I love you. Shut up. Isaac, any final thoughts?
Any final thoughts, Isaac?
Final thoughts, yes. Two things. First of all, along those same lines of taking that outcast group and making them the heroes of the story, totally the same thing with Twilight, of taking basically goth culture, like some people who might feel on the outside, outcasts, whatever, making them the heroes of the story. Bring It On, taking cheerleaders, suddenly for some reason making them cool. Anyway, last thought.
I was a cheerleader. You better watch where you step there.
So,
which is no surprise to anyone, by the way.
So we have this whole dystopian world, right? Where, like he says, life sucks for everybody, right? But they're spending all of their time in this virtual world where there's zero personal accountability, really.
Right.
Do you think that part of the state of, and I don't know if this was intentional by the author, if you want to talk about if this was his intent or just something that you could read into the book, do you think that part of the state of the world that he presents is actually due to the lack of accountability in most people's, quote, reality?
That's interesting.
I
don't know if it was intentional, but it's a good point. I mean,
I think he was looking around at what our world was in 2011 when he was writing it, and supposing
it was a crap
could
show.
happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you could be onto something there.
I do too.
There are some authors that I don't think are smart enough in their writing to make that point.
You're gonna say J.K. Rowling, just move on.
I don't think he was intentional with that, but it was something that I got from it. Was like, oh, I think that the way that people are living is actually perpetuating this terrible existence.
I think that's the point of some of these books is you're supposed to be reading what you read, and the intent you read with is how you interpret it. right?
Mm-hmm.
When we go into books, sometimes our slate is clean and we just read it as is. Some of us go in with it already having something in mind. It's how you interpret what's on that page.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Molly, any final thoughts, or I'm gonna wrap us up if that's okay?
I don't have a count, but I feel like that author tried to get every single 80s reference possible in. From war games to mentioning Breakfast Club, I feel like he mentioned every single video game.
Yeah.
From here to from 80 to 89.
He definitely did his research because he's also our age, so he didn't grow up in this time either. Like he's also our age, so he did his research.
I need to see that binder.
All right, so Isaac, thank you for joining us for our first of 2 episodes with you.
Thank you.
Next week we are covering this book.
Yeah, Starship Troopers.
Oh yay!
Oh wait, was I supposed to say it?
Starship Troopers. Yeah, that's fine. Starship Troopers.
So you can see it on the video.
Isaac will be hosting next week, so it's just his show.
I do my monologue and just have you two like sitting there watching me.
Just nodding.
And besties, and all of Isaac's fans too. If you want to keep listening, at the end of the month we're covering this book. They both die at the end. Isaac will not be a part of that one. It'll just be back to being me and Molly.
I mean, you can come sit and hang out, but we're talking.
But another dystopian type book. So I guess that's our theme for the month of January. I don't know. But thank you for joining us for our first episode of season 2.
Yes,
season 2. All right,
bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on Book Besties with special guest Isaac Gordan of Master of None. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The views discussed here are those of Molly, April, and Isaac, not those of anyone else. Today's book was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Your Book Besties are April Watkins and Molly Biggs. Editing by Thomas Watkins, and music is Sleep Sweetly by Pritchetta. Don't forget to follow Book Besties on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. If you'd like to contact the Book Besties, please email us at bookbestiespod@gmail.com.